Good afternoon and welcome to the April 30th special meeting of the Glendale City Council. Call to order at 2:02 p.m. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Council members Brotman,
Here.
Arpetian,
Here.
Kasakian,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Mayor Asatrian.
Here. And what's next?
Next is my report. The agenda for the Tuesday, April 30th, 2024 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on April 22nd, 2024 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Next is item 1, study session number 1, fiscal year 2023-2024 general fund projection, proposed fiscal year 2024-2025 general fund budget, 5-year general fund forecast, potential future revenue enhancements.
Awesome. Mr. Kalanian?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mayor Asatrian, members of the City Council. Today, first report, we'll be presenting our annual fiscal year budget. It's that time of the year, and we'll have a look ahead at the future years. This year, we have modified the presentation to make the study sessions even more efficient, and meaning that I won't go over the functions of each individual department as I had done in the past, since by now you all are familiar with those functions. And we have planned 4 exciting study sessions for you between now and June 4th, which is the planned date of the public hearing and the adoption of the budget. This year, we'll also cover a handful of potential revenue sources to help offset the budget deficits in the outer years. As I have noted before, the study sessions are for information only. We will not be seeking direction from council on the potential revenue sources, as well as not seeking direction from council. Feel free to ask as many questions as you like, or you need clarification on items that will be discussed today. That said, before we delve into our schedule, I wanted to extend my sincere appreciation to the budget team in our finance department that probably 2 weeks after we adopt the budget, they go and start working on the next year's budget, as well as all the department heads, the departments, the budget liaisons. They put in a tremendous amount of work into preparing these annual budgets for your consideration. With that, let's take a look at the schedule. As I said, 4 sessions before the public hearing and the adoption. Starting with today, obviously, staff will cover the fiscal year 23-24 general fund projection, general fund 5-year forecast, next fiscal year's 24-25 proposed general fund budget, as well as potential future revenue enhancements, as I mentioned. Session number 2 will take place the following Tuesday, May 7th. We'll cover the citywide fee study, as well as potential pension refinancing and infrastructure bond discussion. Session 3 will be on Tuesday, again, May 14th. This will be next fiscal year's proposed citywide budget for all the funds. And the last, session 4, on May 21st, we will cover follow-up items that have come up during the previous 3 budget study session, requests from council, and any other additions or clarifications that we may deem necessary. And then June 4th will be budget hearing and adoption. With that, if you don't have any questions from me, I'll turn it over to not Mr. Hernandez, but Mr. Bradford, Jason Bradford, our Finance and IT Director, to start the presentation.
Yeah, if you don't mind, before you go on, I wanted clarification on the agenda itself. I see that there's a lot of people here, then I'm guessing it has to do with the potential discussion on revenue streams, including the taxes. I do want to make clear that we're not, I know that you stated it, but we've been getting hundreds of emails I want to make clear that we're not making any decisions today as it pertains to taxes, but looking at the agenda, what I don't see on the revenue enhancements are that I know that at the very least, there were some sources that I had recommended, including the lease of lands and looking at EV charger public-private partnerships. And I know our IT department was working on it. When are those items going to be coming?
So I was saving that for just before the presentation on the 4 taxes. You are correct. Back in June of last year, there were 13 items that we brought to council for consideration and discussion. And some of them have already started, staff started working on doing research. Some already are in the process of implementation. But today's focus is going to be on 4, right? 3 tax measures. 3 tax measures, 4 tax measures. Okay, 4 tax measures that our consultants will provide a deep dive into the details of how they work. So the rest we'll bring back at later time, but they haven't been forgotten.
As part of the budget session before we adopt a budget.
We can, during the follow-up items, certainly provide updates on those items.
That's right. I would say that it would be necessary for us to have that conversation as we're talking about budget and taxes.
We can do that.
Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead.
Question.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
If I may, so on the second budget study, there is a infrastructure bond.
Yes.
Is that like a new, when you say bond, it's like a tax, or what is it?
No,
So
it's,
you issue a bond for,
right, it's not a tax, but it's a borrowing mechanism to pay for certain implementation of certain infrastructure projects.
got it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bradford.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Galanian. Good afternoon, Mayor Asatrian, members of the council. It is my pleasure to kick off our 24-25 budget study sessions. Today, I will start with a year-end projection of our current fiscal year, 23-24. I will dive into the general fund 5-year forecast and cover the proposed 24-25 general fund budget. As Mr. Galanian mentioned, we have brought back some information for potential future revenue enhancements. We have our consultants here from HDL to present information on the transfer tax, parcel tax, business license tax, and cannabis tax. So with that, I will start with the 23-24 year-end projection for our resources, and I'm pleased to report that our final projection is very close to what we thought it would be back in December. We projected back then a total revenue of $307.7 million, and it will come in just a little lower, about $1.2 million lower, or 99.6% of our revised estimate. Well, I'm not going to cover every single revenue category. I will touch on a few of the categories that are changing. First, property tax. Good news, we are getting a little more in property tax than we initially estimated, about $1.1 million. On the flip side, we do think sales tax is going to come in a bit lower. Our fourth quarter of 2023 did come in lower relative to our fourth quarter in 2022. And as such, we are adjusting it downwards a little bit. And Glendale was not the outlier for sales tax. This is what's consistent across the state, the region.
Mr. Bradford, can you, oh, there you go.
Thank you. As I was saying, Glendale is certainly not the outlier when it comes to sales tax. This was consistent across the state, including the county, region. All categories were generally down compared to the fourth quarter of 2022. So our consultants have factored in all this information and have lowered our sales tax projection for the year. Although I'm happy to say this is a one-time lowering. We do expect sales tax to increase 2% in the next fiscal year. So this is really a one-time recalibration.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, and is it okay if we ask questions as we go?
That would be easier for staff.
Yeah. Just on the sales tax, any particular categories?
So, yeah, council member Brotman, members of the council, it was autos primarily. That was where we saw the biggest decrease. Really, the cost of borrowing is to the point where we saw a decrease in the autos as interest rates have stayed high.
And I know it's a big part of our sales tax base. How dependent are we on those dealerships?
Relative to other cities, we're a little more dependent on autos. I want to say roughly we're about 25% of our sales tax base is autos.
So that's big. Okay, thanks.
So continuing on through our revenue discussion, our license permits are just tracking a little lower, so we are lowering our estimate back to our original estimate that we had at adoption. Our interest is up based on strong market returns to date, so that is coming in slightly higher. We have revised the transfer down, the electric transfer, to match what was in the electric COSA that was recently approved. So with all the various adjustments, our revenues will be $306.5 million, or 99.6% received, combined with the final use of our Measure S fund balance. We have a total resources of $325.2 million.
One more question. Just on that Measure S balance, so basically that was what we had left set aside, and now we're not separating Measure S anymore, so it's not accumulating any more revenues, right?
Councilmember Brotman, members of the council, that is correct. This was our final Measure S dollars that were unallocated, if you will, and we are folding that back into the general fund reserve for future allocation.
You got it, thanks.
So on the expenditure side, this is our salary and benefits in the general fund. We do anticipate coming in under budget of about $7.7 million. This is due to our vacancy savings. We have a total of 942 authorized positions in the general fund, of which 121 are about right now, 13% are vacant. It does fluctuate. It does ebb and flow week to week, month to month, and we do anticipate coming in under budget.
Sorry, one more. On the vacancies, could you give us, so you said 121 out of 942, I think those were the numbers. Could you give us a sense of, out of that 121, are there concentrations in particular departments?
Councilmember Rotman, members of the council, absolutely. There's 4 departments that make up about 75% of our vacancies, and they are the largest departments, as you would expect. Glendale Police Department, Glendale Fire Department, CDD, and Parks and Rec make up about 75% of those vacancies.
And I would add, Mayor Asatryan, member of City Council, that we are in the upward trajectory or downward trajectory, depending on how you look at it, of filling these vacancies. We started off at 20% vacancy, and now we're down to 15%. And I want to extend again my appreciation to HR department for their efforts. We're at 15%. We're aiming for 10%.
13, right? Did you say 13 or 15?
Currently at 13%.
Now we're down to 13, okay. So
13
more or
to
less.
15.
But we were at 20%, how long ago was that?
Last year.
A year ago this
Right,
time, we were at 20,
right,
and we're
right.
down now 13. Very good, and we're trying to get to 10.
10, yes.
That's good progress.
So, excuse me. So that 222 million, it was budgeted for, right? But we're spending 215 million because of the vacancies?
Councilmember Garpetian, members of the council, that is correct. We are coming in under budget due to those vacancy savings.
So if we fill the vacancies, we would need that $229 million.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
For maintenance and operation, capital outlay and transfers, again, we do expect to come in under budget, under expended about 10.7 million. As noted on the slide, a good piece of that, 5.2 million, is for what we would call recurring Measure S programming, and also set aside money for economic development activities. That total is about 5.2 million of that savings, and that will carry over into next year. The remaining under expenditures is just various maintenance and operation accounts. Most of the savings is in the contractual services account. So based on our forecasted revenues, along with the one-time final use of our Measure S balance, we have total resources of $325.2 million versus projected expenditures of $310 million, which would leave an increase of about $15.2 million However, adjusted for those carryovers I mentioned on the previous slide, we'll have a projected net increase to our fund balance of about $10 million. With the projected surplus, we are proposing to move the year-end surplus to fund the Central Park renovation. The reason we are proposing to do the transfer now is because we are applying for a grant. We can get anywhere from $3 to $6 million for this project, and the $10 million would satisfy our local match requirement.
And we have made a commitment to have, as you may know, the Central Park renovation completed in time for the opening of the museum at the site.
So if the Central Park funding is approved by the council, we would have no change to our fund balance. We'd end the year right where we had started the year, with a fund balance of $123.2 million and a reserve percentage of 38.5%, which is above our target of 35%.
Are there any questions on the current fiscal year?
I'm holding my questions to the end.
Me too.
Let me just, if you could, just explain again for all of us and for the public. So 35% has been our target, but we have a range, right? 25 to 35? Can you just explain that again? And then I think in our charter, it's 15 or something? Maybe just a run through again.
Councilmember
for all of
Robin,
us.
members of the council, that is correct. The council reserve policy is a floor of 25%, with a target of 35% as the ceiling. And we do have a charter reserve requirement, which is 50% of our tax, property tax receipts, which currently is about $40 million. So it's somewhere around 12% would be our charter requirement for our reserve.
Around 12%. Okay.
That range.
May I ask a question? In regard to the sales tax decrease that you pointed to, and you said, am I correct in understanding that this is a trend, that there was sales tax decreases regionally?
Glendale, Councilmember Kasaki and members of the council, Glendale was not alone in having lower sales tax than expected. It was across the region, LA County, statewide. So we trended with the state essentially and the region.
What is the reason for that trend in this cycle, and why do you anticipate an uptick in the future?
So several reasons that go into when our consultants factor into this. There's been a little bit of shift away from the luxury purchases to more of the discount purchases, big box retail. They do think the high cost of borrowing impacted sales tax, but they do not believe it to continue on into the future years. Our consultants are basically forecasting a 2% increase. They do anticipate interest rates dropping at some point in the future. But they take a lot of economic data that they take into account into their forecast.
And they've also noted that the cost of the prices on EV, electrical vehicles, have dropped too.
Mm-hmm.
So this is our updated general fund 5-year forecast. As I was saying, a lot for the revenues, a lot goes into the forecast. We factor in a lot of data points, whether it be historical trends. We do use consultants when appropriate. We do work with departments on all their major revenues. Based on all of those data points, we have forecasted the average growth at about 2.25% in this 5-year forecast for our revenues. I do want to point out our revenues are flat between fiscal year 26-27 and fiscal year 27-28, and that is because the landfill is estimated to close in 2027, and as such, those revenues have been removed out of the forecast. And as we indicated last year, we're going to start factoring in our Section 115 trust to help pay our pension obligations starting in fiscal year 26-27. On the appropriations side, as council knows, all of our labor contracts were set to expire June 30th. So for the past several months, we've been negotiating with all our labor groups. And as such, the labor agreements we've reached are now all included in the appropriations and in the forecast. And placeholders have been put in for the groups we are still negotiating with. All of the labor contracts run through 26, 27, and then again, placeholders have been put in for our labor forecasts in the remaining 2 years of the forecast. For the maintenance and operation costs, we do have annual increases of about, on average, about 2.25%. So based on these forecasts of revenues and expenditures, we start using reserves starting in 24-25, and our reserve percentage goes down below 25% starting in fiscal year 27-28. So this is I'm going to show two versions of the forecast. This forecast is without proposed fee study revenues, and now I'm going to show a version of the forecast with our proposed fee study revenue.
Okay, can I ask a question before we get to that? So on the appropriations, for instance, the $315.6 million for this coming fiscal year, what does that assume as far as vacancies go, or yeah?
Councilmember Rotman, members of council, we have factored in about another $8 million for vacancies into the forecast. That has been our historical average.
So so you said that we're bringing our vacancy rate down to 10%. Is that basically what's in this number?
Essentially, more or less. It may be a little higher than that number, but that's, again, historically, we've been around that $8 million number.
But if we were to fill our vacancies, I know you're never going to fill 100%, but if we were to just say, hey, these are positions that we have because we think they're necessary, of course, if we fill them, what would that look like?
So Councilmember Rotman, members of the council, there is a point, if, assuming we were 100% staff, it would add to this use of fund balance. We would cross over and we wouldn't have those vacancy savings to rely on anymore.
Right, but what kind of numbers are we looking at?
It's roughly about $8 million.
Councilmember Brahman, as you noted, though, that's not a realistic scenario, right? We always have vacancies through attrition. There's really a scenario we can't foresee that we have 100% of our vacancies filled.
No, but is 10%,
10%
is that
is
about as low as you think? That's like a...
Right, it's an industry standard, pretty much.
Okay. So we're planning on getting it down to 10%. That's in our budget. And, right? I'm seeing like maybe not. I'm not...
Councilmember, I'm going to hedge it a little bit. We factored in about $8 million, which is probably a little higher than that 10% number. But that's, again, just based on her historical averages in the general fund. If we do see the trending coming down to 10%, we can certainly make an adjustment.
Okay, because you've been hearing a push from all of us to, fill these positions, especially critical positions, in police and permit services and code enforcement. There are a number of areas where we've all been saying that. So I just want to make sure that if staff achieves what council is asking it to, is that consistent with these numbers? Or are we going to face a shortfall that we have to then fix during the course of the year?
Councilmember Rotman, members of council, it depends, and I kind of give you that answer. It just depends how quickly we can fill them and what positions. From where we currently are to where we're going to get, I don't think it'll be significant, but it could be slightly a little different.
Okay.
And I will tell you, Councilman Brotman, yes, we've heard and we understand council's direction and concern with filling especially public safety positions. And Chief Sid can verify and confirm that we have gone from at least sworn officers, 25 vacancies down to 8 currently. And the incentive program for laterals that City Council approved and adopted has helped tremendously in that endeavor. So our HR department staff, as well as Ms. Adams, has hired a couple of consultants that's helping out with the recruitments. So that goes a long way, but as I said, there's really no realistic way of filling 100% of these positions because we always have people who retire, who leave for other jobs, and through promotions, through attrition, we'll always have vacancies.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not setting up a conflict with ourselves, because I don't want a situation where we're pulling back on filling vacancies because we don't have the budget, right? We want to budget for the goals that we've set, which are to fill these positions as much as possible. That's all. I think you get the
Right,
you get
but
the point.
also add that recently we have started this plan of managed hiring so that it will give the opportunity for the HR department to be able to fill these positions, as well as so that we don't have a sudden large impact on the budget. So we're managing it as we move forward through the year.
So I think, oh, please go ahead.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so in a nutshell, from the appropriation from 350 million goes up to 361 million by 28, 29, and every year that we are basically short 10 million, 11, 10, 20, and 23, we're using our reserves to go down, to balance off the budget, basically. So our reserves from 123 million will go down to 45 million at the end of 28, 29.
Correct,
And
Councilman
that's what that
Garpetia.
12%,
Yes.
12% minimum threshold is?
Correct. Correct. And that's in the, Councilmember Garpetian, that's in the absence of any approved potential new revenue sources.
Right.
That's not taken into account.
And that section 115 trust, I know maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. How much do we have in that trust at this time? Or if it's, we can wait for it if it's
It's in the
coming.
parking lot, so he's looking it up.
I believe it's in the range of $40 million today.
It's $40 million?
Somewhere
Give and
very
take.
close
Okay.
to 40 million.
All right, thank you.
So I have a couple of comments before you move on. I think when we're talking about sales tax, one of the things that I've heard in talking to the auto dealers is the number of cars that are actually being returned because there is no proper EV charging infrastructure. So people are actually buying them and then they're returning them. So I think if that is something that we're losing out on, I think it would be important for us to look at how we're solving a larger problem out there. Whether it's us investing in it or doing our, public-private partnerships, whatever it may be to incentivize that, because that's having an effect on the auto sales. I think with the vacancy comments, I had noted this, I think last year at some point and a couple of times, I think just throughout the year. I really would like, and if this requires a formal request, I really would like a report from HR. We've talked about this time and again where other departments come to us with their needs, with their structures. We do this to CDD all the time, but we haven't ever really had our HR department come through. And I keep talking about how if we're not creating certain structures and looking at even maybe the processes that they use for filling vacancies, if you have a continuous trend that you see that you have you keep saving $8 million, or that's what your projection is, that's a pretty big chunk of money we're talking about that could either be invested in community projects. So I don't know if that requires for me to put in a formal request for an HR report. I would like to know, what the process really looks like when there are vacancies, how long it takes for it to get posted, how long does it take, what are the processes in place that we have, that the minute it is posted, what other mediums are we using to help get the word out, how long it takes for us to fill those positions, because it seems like, we had a higher number. I know that number is going down, but I am interested to see, or for us to get some sort of report on HR proceedings and how we can make that better.
Mayor Al-Sadrian, if it's a report that you'd like to come to the open session, I would ask that you
Make
bring
a
it up
formal
as a
request.
a new
Okay, then.
business.
If then I would want to, for maybe next meeting,
You
can put it on the
you can do
agenda.
this evening.
Okay, all right. And then I think for the reserves, the 38.5, as well as the forecast, I noted this during the last budget session, but when the forecast doesn't include revenue streams we've already talked about and that staff is working on, it's not an accurate forecast for me. So I'm trying to understand why is it that some things are included and some things are not. I had mentioned this again last year. There seems to be a trend of we're always doing great the next year, and then it's, you know, a downfall from there. So if the projections constantly show the next year looks great, and then it's, you know, just going down, then we have to also look at how we're forecasting. So can you speak to that?
Mayor Sadrian, members of the council, as Mr. Galani indicated, we do have some of those other revenues under process. And when we come back with the follow-up, we can look at those to see how far along we are. And I always balance trying to give as accurate information as possible. So if we have a pretty good sense that we can accurately forecast, then we can see where we're at with those other revenues and include them in the forecast to see what it would look like when we come back with the follow-up.
Okay.
And Mayor Satrian, one of the, I'm looking at, as I noted, the 13 items that we had brought to council for discussion back in June of last year. For example, one of them was utilization of Section 115 trust funds. That's already been taken into account in the 5-year forecast, as you can see, as a line item. And refinancing a pension obligation, that will be at the next study session. That hasn't been obviously implemented. Council had decided not to move forward with the increasing the transient occupancy tax. And we'll cover this through, this is really not the right time, but we'll cover it at the follow-up budget study session. Citywide user fee study, that will be at the next budget study session. And the next slide, Mr. Bradford will talk about that. So some of these programs, with the exception of potential taxes, have been already baked into the 5-year forecast. And some are, as I noted, in the works. They haven't been finalized. So Mr. Bradford and finance team, the budget team, don't have concrete numbers that they can use. But they will. Once they get implemented, they have better numbers, better understanding in the next year or two budget.
Thanks. Marjorie?
Yeah, so I just want to comment on the unfilled positions issue that we're discussing. I mean, I think we need to caution that we should not feel a need to fill every unfilled position. What we need to do is try and encourage efficiencies from our department heads, either through the use of technology or proper human resource management. Every budget that I've been in on has always had a significant portion of unfilled vacancies, and there's never been a call to say, gee, look at all these unfilled vacancies. In fact, we're saying how great that is, that we have these positions that we've budgeted for, but due to the way we're running the city, we aren't required to spend on those. Now, there are certain areas where we've got some hot spots, no doubt, but if it comes down to hiring another firefighter or another police officer versus giving some overtime to them, clearly the better move is to give them the overtime in terms of our budget, because you don't have the PERS loading on that. So I just think we need to be a little bit careful of that. I know some department heads like to hang on to those unfilled vacancies and protect their budget and say, look, city manager, that I haven't blown my budget, I haven't used all these, I'm properly managing or efficiently managing my resources as a department head. So, you know, we need to sort of not just assume because there are unfilled positions, we need to fill them as soon as possible, because there's a significant load on our budget that causes, so.
Mayor, sorry, may I make a clarification? Because we've had a lot of conversation around the vacancies, and I want to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. When we're talking about a $10.9 million shortage in 24-25 or an 11.8 in the following year going on to the following 3 years, that's assuming we continue to carry about an $8 million vacancy savings. In other words, if we went and filled every single one of the positions that are budgeted for in our budgets, that $10.9 million would go up to 18.9, and that 11.8 would go up to 19. So I want to, kind of different perspectives, certainly, but I want to make sure everybody had the same idea of what we're talking about.
And there are significant civil service requirements as well, that if you cancel those, if you say, you know what, we really don't need all those positions, why are we fooling ourselves? Once you terminate them, if you want to rehire or recreate, you've got to go through the whole civil service position again, process again. So it's not quite what it seems when you say, look, we've got these vacant positions, let's fill them. There's a lot of nuances in it.
You're correct, Councilman Najarian. And over the last couple of years, we have managed, we've changed the way that we take into account vacancies and department heads holding on to those vacancies. So we have been able to reduce that amount. And like I said, we're going through a managed hiring. And you're right, we can't fill all of them at the same time.
I actually, I believe that Mr. Galanian, in our conversation, has, for example, told me that they do actually look at if there's different ways to, be more efficient in each of those when those vacancies come up. And so this is why I'm saying I think it would just be helpful for all of us to understand what the processes are. So when we do have these items come up, we're better versed.
On slide 12, you mentioned that from year 25, 26, and 27, 28, that there is a difference in revenues because we did not consider the revenue from the landfill. Can you tell me how much was that? The revenue from the landfill is like 2 million, if I'm not, is it more?
Councilmember Garpetti, members of council, it's actually $9 million annually into the general fund.
$9 million to general fund?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
One last clarification. Earlier, the question was how much was in the 115 trust. I said 40 million. It's 40.8 million as of March 31st. 40.8, so almost 41 million.
Okay, so this is the 5-year forecast, just another snapshot, and as Mr. Galani indicated, next week we'll be before the council presenting the results of our fee study. So this includes the fee study revenues, if approved, as recommended by staff during budget adoption. We think it will generate about $4 million a year. We haven't adjusted our fees since 2016, but our costs have gone up. So this is just to give you an idea. You can see the impact to our revenues, and particularly our reserves. It's down to single digits for the next 3 years, and we would not dip below 25% until 27, 28.
Question. Just to clarify, that 4 million from the citywide fee study, that does not mean every single fee is achieving cost recovery. We're still subsidizing certain services. Is that correct?
Councilmember Brotman, members of council, that is correct. The short answer is yes. This is just a recommendation. We'll get into it more next week during the presentation, but
Okay.
that
So
is
we'll be able
correct.
to see explicitly which items we are subsidizing in the sense that we're charging less than the cost recovery and which we are not.
We can give you a sampling of a
Yeah,
handful or
yeah,
a dozen, because there are thousands and thousands.
Sure. But the significant ones would be helpful for us, because that should be a conscious decision that we're making, that, hey, we're subsidizing these services, that's costing us, right? But we never go above. By law, we can never charge more than the cost recovery, just so people understand how it works.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
We're going to get through this.
We will, we will.
Okay, well, very briefly, I will cover the proposed 24-25 budget. I will start with the revenues. We do have modest increases built in. Again, our consultants for property tax, sales tax, they're forecasting 3.1%, 2.1% respectively for property tax, sales tax. Again, based on all the data the consultants have taken into account. Our utility users tax is up, as GWP will have another rate increase, so that does impact our UUT. Speaking of the proposed fee changes, our licenses and permits and charges for services are up, and that's where the fees, if we did raise them, that's where those categories would reflect. All told, our recurring revenues are forecasted to increase about 4% from our revised estimate, or about 12.2 million. On the expenditure side, salary and benefits are up, as this is the first year of all the labor agreements kicking in. M&O is increasing for several reasons, including increased IT costs for cybersecurity. We're looking at a fairly significant data center upgrade. Our utility costs are also going up, costs for insurances are going up, and so on and so forth. And based on our projection, just a quick recap, our projected ending reserve, again, this assumes proposed fee increases based on our projected resources and appropriations. We'd have a projected use of fund balance to balance the budget of about 6.9 million and a reserve percentage of about 35.7%.
Can you explain that transfers out? That's the general fund transfer? That's 16 million and 14 million?
Councilmember Garpetti and members of council, yes, absolutely. That consists of a couple of things. The bulk of it is about $10 million to fund our general fund capital improvement. So that's all the improvements in the parks, the libraries, city facilities, et cetera, et cetera. We are transferring money out to pay our debt service on our police building. That should be paid off in 2030. And then the rest of the transfer is to continue to fund our fleet operation and our building maintenance fund.
Thanks.
Are there any questions on the budgets before we move on to the next segment of this budget study session? As I noted earlier at the beginning of this presentation, back in June of 2023, we presented to Council 13 separate potential items that could enhance our revenues. And these are all the items that would help maintain the level of service that our residents are accustomed to, the quality of service that we provide to the community, as well as being able to reduce the future budget deficits. Again, a reminder, today's session is to provide you detailed information on 4 of these potential tax measures. We are not seeking direction. We're not asking for votes. We won't be asking to put this on the ballot for November. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Bradford, who will also introduce our 3-4 different consultants who will be helping us with this.
It'll be a team effort. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Nicole Cohen to come up to the podium. She's Vice President of Cohen and Cohen. She's over 25 years of experience in property tax analysis and processing, parcel audits. Her team currently oversees monthly audits of property transfer tax receipts in Santa Monica, Culver City, and Los Angeles, as well as tax placements in 20 jurisdictions. And with that, I turn the presentation over to her.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, city staff, and guests. We've been working with finance staff for the last several months to look at potential property tax revenue measures that could generate revenue. Due to Prop 13, you have some limitations on your property tax revenue without going to the voters for a variety or for a couple of options. I'm going to be talking about these options in a very general way and then sort of diving into a more detailed deep dive into how the taxes work, and then showing some models using other agencies within LA County and within Glendale's exact data from prior years. So I'm going to first be presenting property transfer tax. It's a general tax. It means revenue can be used for any purpose, and due to the general tax, it requires a majority voter approval. The additional other type of tax is a parcel tax. It's a special tax and requires 2/3 voter approval. Generally, it is earmarked for certain purposes. Public safety, roads, libraries, parks, etc. are common uses for parcel tax revenue. So a real property transfer tax is the first thing I'll be going over. It's a general tax, again, majority voter approval. It's only an option for charter cities. So if I were sitting in a general law city, they wouldn't be an option. It's a tax on the price of property when it's sold or transferred. So at the time of a sale transaction or a long-term lease, which is not as common, there would be a tax on the price of the transaction. It applies to all non-governmental parcels, and it could also be, often there are exemptions for low-income housing and these type of taxes. The city can determine its own tiers, rates, and methodologies. And the current rate in Glendale is $1.10 with 55 per $1,000 of sale price. Currently, the city receives 55 cents of that $1.10, and the county receives the additional, the other 55 cents. If an additional tax is passed, the LA County will receive the whole $1.10 that is currently being charged, and the city will receive whatever rate is passed. So let's say the city passes a $2 rate, the total rate will be $3.10, with the county receiving $1.10 and the city receiving the $2. So we've developed 3 specific models. We're using Santa Monica's current tax rate model for this first example. We're using 22-23 sale transactions. So, you know, we have to look at a total fiscal year that already occurred. 23-24 is not over yet. So we decided to use the 22-23 fiscal year. At the top, it shows the $1.10 per thousand, and that was the rate that was actually collected for those sale transactions in the fiscal year 22-23 year. Glendale received $800,000, and the county received $800,000. So that represents the 55-cent split for each of the jurisdictions. If we were to use the Santa Monica rate structure and take all of those transactions that occurred in the fiscal year 22-3, it would look like the bottom portion. So if the sale price is between 0 and 5 million, Santa Monica charges $3 per thousand. There were 947 of the city's 970 sales that would fall into that tier. Glendale's portion would have been 3.6 million, with the county receiving 1.3 million. That represents the $1.10. Second tier would be on sales between 5 million and 8 million, $6 per thousand. Just 13 sales in the city fell in that tier. $500,000 for the city and 0.1 million for the county. And then 8 million and over, the number of $56 per thousand is Santa Monica's rate. 10 sales fell into that tier. It would have generated 7.9 million for Glendale and 0.2 million for the county. So you can see that all told in this model, 12 million for Glendale and 1.6 million would be generated in the county.
Can I ask a question about this?
Yes.
I think I know the answer, but I just want to make sure. So if I'm in Santa Monica and I have a property that is $7.9 million, okay, so I'm paying that 6 per thousand. If I sell it at 8 million, the entire 8 million is subject to the new higher, substantially higher tax.
That is how
right?
Santa Monica's tax works, yes.
It seems very disruptive. How do you know about how that works in practice? I just can't imagine a scenario like that working, because I mean you're gonna get a whole bunch of sales that are right below 8. And
True. We see that. I mean, but if you have a $20 million property, you're not going to sell it for 7.9 million.
yeah,
Right.
okay.
So the people that are right around the tier line,
Yeah.
we do see that, yes.
You see that, okay. Got it.
This is the second model, and this is sort of dovetails into that question. Culver City has a marginal rate model, and we use the same 22-23 Glendale data to run through that model. So in the marginal model, the portion of the sale price that falls within the tier is taxed at that rate. So you don't have that people trying to lowball the line, right? So if we run Glendale's data through that, 0 to 1.5 million, Culver City charges $450 per thousand. 687 sales fall within that tier. The Glendale's portion is 2.8 million, and the county's portion is 0.7. 1.5 million to 3 million, they charge $15 per thousand. 225 sales fall within there. 3 million and 0.5 million are generated for each of the entities. 3 million to 10 million, 51 sales. 4.1 million and 0.3 million, and then 10 million and over, just 7 sales. They're charged, $40 per thousand, 3.5 million and 0.1 million. So that would generate, if Glendale had had that tax in place for the 22-23 year, of the 970 sales would have generated 13.4 million and 1.6 million. So it's the same for the county because the $1.10 doesn't change.
Question. Do you know how long they've been collecting these fees
In Culver City,
in Culver City?
I believe it's 2021.
And, okay, thank you, that's all.
Can I follow up on that? Santa Monica?
So in Santa Monica, they had, let me be clear about Culver City. Culver City had a base rate of $4.50, and they passed the 15, the 30, and the 40 in 2021. So they already had a tax, and they passed an additional tax in 2021. And Santa Monica had a $3 tax. I believe in 2020, they passed the additional rates, and they passed the $56. I think it was last year, 2023.
Okay.
And then after the initial study, or the initial meeting where Jason presented, we came back with, we were asked to do an additional model based on feedback after that meeting, where the city would still continue to keep a 55-cent rate. I want to be clear about what that means. So if the city were to pass an additional tier, but also want to keep the 55 cents, you would have to charge a total of $1.65, because once you create an additional tier, the county would keep the full $1.10. So for the city to keep 55 cents, you'd have to charge $1.65 total, if that makes sense. And so in that model, between 0 and 2 million would be charged 55 per thousand, so a total of $1.65, with 1 million being kept by the county and $500,000 being kept by the city. About the majority of the sales fall within 0 to 2 million, so 832 sales out of 970. And then 2 million and over would be charged $10 per thousand. That generates about 2.9 million, just 138 sales. So 3.4 million in total would be generated by that tax for the city, and then the 1.6 million remains the same for the county. Questions?
The examples that you have, like Santa Monica or Culver City, did we have Pasadena here? No, we didn't. Right?
No.
So, do you know what their share of the property tax rate is? Like, if I remember correctly, we had the budget study many years ago. Glendale was receiving 13% back.
City
from
share of the tax dollar, the regular property tax dollar.
property tax, and Pasadena was
I think it's
23 and
20.
change, and Burbank is 19%, and so they collect a lot more than we do. Their share is a lot more from the entire property tax, but yet they still went out and increased all these fees
Yes.
to balance their budget. So, do you know what the Culver City is? Their share
Culver
of the-
City's share of the 1%, I want to say it's 13 cents, but I might be misremembering. 13 cents of the tax dollar.
and
think that's
Santa
about
Monica?
Santa Monica, I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's in the 20s because they're full service, but
That's fine, thank you.
so then my second option is a secured parcel tax. It requires 2/3 voter approval.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
One thing before you go on. So you mentioned Santa Monica, Culver City. We know about LA, that's been big news. Any other cities in LA County?
Redondo Beach has an additional tax rate. I believe Pasadena, well, or is it parcel tax? I'm thinking that Pasadena.
Parcel tax.
Yeah, no. Those are the ones that
So
are,
very few, really, at this point.
yeah, because it's charter cities, so there's not as many charter cities. There are some charter cities that don't have a transfer tax, just like you do.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thanks.
Secured parcel tax requires 2/3 voter approval. The tax must be for a specific purpose. Common special taxes are for library, that's what Pasadena's is for. Public safety, parks, ambulance services, et cetera. It applies to all non-exempt parcels. Some parcels may be taxed at different rates based on their benefit from the tax. So for example, a public safety tax often is charged per number of units or square footage based on potential for having to call for public safety help. A parcel tax cannot be value-based, and so flat taxes are an option, but the most popular option is some sort of characteristics-based tax, whether or not it's use code, square footage, number of units, lot and living square foot. So we've done 2 scenarios here with an eye towards trying to figure out how to get you to $1 million so that you could sort of take those rates and multiply them mentally to try to get to a target tax. This current first scenario looks at a flat fee per use category. So we're showing a commercial rate at $69. For almost all the rates are $69 per parcel, including multi-unit. So an apartment building would pay $69 total, and then we have the residential, single-family, attached and detached. That's just whether or not you're a condo or a standalone, single-family, detached home. And vacant, we're showing at about $11.50 per parcel to get to a total of $1 million. So if you wanted to raise $5 million, you would just multiply those by 5. Questions on this?
But is it a fair way of increasing these taxes? Because if there's a 4-unit apartment building, it's $69, and a 50-unit is $69? So it's flat across the board.
Right. I mean, most taxes are structured the way that our second scenario here is. And so those are taxed by unit. So the commercial, we have sort of a sliding scale based on benefit use. Commercial being $91, but when you get to the single family, we're showing $8.95 per unit on all the multi-unit residential. So and we looked at I took my comment off. There's the typical residential unit count on average in the city is about 7 units. So a 7-unit parcel would pay, 7 times $8.95 for like $60. But a 100-unit would get an $800 bill. Again, this is on the property tax bill annually, once a year on the property tax bill. And that would generate $1 million in that same way. Questions on the parcel tax? Okay.
Okay, the next presentation will be on business tax. I'd like to introduce Mr. Eric Myers, Operations Director for HDL. He has a 20-year career in government consulting and has worked as legal counsel for sales tax operations, including work on legislation.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to start and beg your indulgence. I'm going to sort of build up a foundation on the business tax here for just a moment. So the business tax, the basis of the tax is transacting or carrying on business. That is the taxable activity. It's important to keep that in mind as we look at some of the structures, because it can easily slip over into something close to, say, sales tax, or we kind of analogize to other taxes. But the taxable activity is the privilege of transacting or carrying on a business. Another key limitation is that it cannot be imposed on net income. Taxing net income is power reserved to the state, so it has to be on something like gross receipts or some other input into the business activity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And finally, it's imposed for the purpose of generating revenue and not recouping the cost of regulatory activities. So it can get a little confusing because it's sometimes called a business license tax, as we have here. And really, its function is to generate revenue. It's an excise tax on the privilege of transacting or carrying on a business. I'd like to build just a short sort of framework that I think helps put the models that we'll show in context. So that is, what are the 5 key components of a business license tax? We've already mentioned the taxable activity. On the next slide, I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you on the measure of the tax. That matters a lot to how you build the tax. Then the rate. Classification can matter. You'll see that in both the models that we built that look like Pasadena and Burbank. You'll see different classes of businesses taxed at different rates. And so the classification is a key structure, as well as then the results. What revenue might it bring if such a tax were in fact imposed? So measurements, you've got a tax on business activity. You've got to measure that business activity in order to get to the point of being able to impose the tax. Typically, we see one of these 5 variations. Older codes tend to do per employee. That was very common, probably 60s through the 80s, that you see a per employee tax. I won't go over all the pros and cons here. I'll just hit on the fact that, in the past, per employee has been considered less volatile than a gross receipts-based measure. That's eroded a little bit with the change in remote work after the pandemic. It does, from our perspective, put a higher burden on the businesses, some of the businesses that have more labor inputs. So if you're very high on labor inputs into your business model, you're going to pay more respectively than another business. So it doesn't account also for per employee productivity gains that we've seen in the economy over the last several decades, right, that have come from technology. The more revenue produced per employee, the less that's being captured in this measure of the tax. Square footage, the benefit is that it's fixed amount for calculation. It's got some drawbacks, not the least of which is it will automatically reduce your tax to only being imposed on people who have square footage in the city, businesses, instead of on everybody who's coming into the city doing business here as well. So it's an implicit, almost tax break to any outside vendors, and that can have unintended consequences. Per unit, we do see this often in business license tax applied to, say, apartments, for example. You'll see per unit being used there. Flat rate, not as common. When it's used, it's often used in a tiered structure based on gross receipts and then a flat rate. We won't really see that today in the models, but it is out there. It's easy to calculate. From our perspective, though, it doesn't really have a clear relationship to the amount of taxable activity, and it's a bit of a drawback for the measure of a tax. And then finally, gross receipts. Gross receipts is becoming more common throughout the state of California, particularly as cities look to modernize their business license tax ordinances. Its advantages are that it has a close relationship to the amount of business. There's going to be some relationship between the amount of business being conducted and the revenue being produced. Some of its drawbacks can be that it has an increase in volatility. You're going to follow up and down with the business cycle in terms of your revenue. And as I indicated before, it can't be based on net income, so it's going to be on gross, so it's not really directly accounting for differences in profit margin, for example, across different businesses. Any questions about any of that?
I have a question. Maybe you're going to get to this, but if we were to go with a gross receipts tax, we can apply different tax rates to different types of businesses to take account of some businesses are higher margin, some are lower margin. Can we do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Because
you
like
can.
a supermarket, or there's a lot of things that are, high volume, low margin, we can kind of get at that indirectly.
You can get at it indirectly in the classifications.
Okay.
It's not uncommon in California to have a gross receipts rate that's somewhat lower for your sales tax producers and your
Right.
general retail, and
Retail.
they
yeah.
already are contributing to your tax base in other ways.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Question. So in gross receipts, how do we calculate that? They have to provide, is it like an honorary system that the business has to provide to the city and say, my gross is 100,000 a year? Or do we have to go and audit their books? Do they have to provide their tax returns to us? How do we go about this? And what is the cost of managing all of that? Because the city has to have, staff to take care of that and take a look at all the businesses and make sure the receipts, the gross is there and the calculation is correct or what have you. Is it an honorary system, or is it volunteer system, or it's a mandatory system? How do we go about it?
So just like your federal income tax, it is self-reported, right? So you fill out the form and you send it in, and if they don't believe you, they can audit you, right? And that's really the way that gross receipts works throughout the state of California.
Who do they send it into?
Oh, sorry, you send it into the IRS, right? So in this case, they would send you, a business would send it into to the city, right? And the city would take those numbers down and take the payments, and if there was a question about it, there's usually a right to audit built into the ordinance structure.
That was
itself.
exactly my point. So we have to have a division to take a look at, to receive all these applications or reports, make sure they're all correct. And then if we don't believe 1 or 2 or 10 or 100, then we can audit them. And we have to have the
Yes, sir.
staff to audit their books. Okay.
It is a purely locally administered tax. That is both its benefit and its drawback. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. In particular, the fairness of it. I'm a small business owner. I'm an attorney.
Okay.
I've chose Glendale as my home as my business location for the last 30 years. I pay the higher rents that Glendale office buildings charge. I pay the higher utilities that Glendale charges. I pay wages to individuals that live in Glendale that support the economy by doing so. I pay and I hire those that provide services, attorney services, court reporters, equipment maintenance, et cetera, from Glendale. When I go to lunch in Glendale. My dollar is going to the local sales tax providers. When I entertain clients, it's in Glendale. And on top of that now, small business owners or even large business owners who have decided to invest in Glendale, to be a part of the city, to make it a vibrant, productive economic city, are getting hit with a business license tax. I find, and this is not a new argument, you've heard this before, but for me, I kind of find it, offensive. Like, oh my God, I've invested in this city, and I could have gone to any other city if I was looking for a no-tax city, and that's what I did. But not to pop that on just doesn't seem fair. It just, in all these taxes, and we had the parcel tax before, and we'll have another type of tax ahead of us. I think there's got to be some equity in it, some fairness, some relationship from the person that you're taking the taxes from to the benefits that they're getting back. So how would you address that concern that I have? And I'm not the only one. I'm sure a lot of small business owners and just business owners are saying, wow, what's up with this, man? I'm investing in Glendale. Now you're kicking me in the butt. Not hugely. It's not like you're chopping off my foot, but you're kicking me in the butt.
Yeah, I think the question is, as you framed it, one about the needs of the city that makes it possible for you to have a thriving business, that it provides infrastructure, light, power, water, sidewalks that you can walk on, parks that people want to visit. So it really is a question of how this tax goes to fund the services that are provided and even expected for this great community. And really with, I'm sympathetic in the sense that I look at it as, is this a sound investment? And that's, I think, the great way to look at a business tax is it's a revenue stream for your city to build the market and the community that obviously you've contributed to and will hopefully continue to contribute to.
If I could just briefly respond, those benefits of parks, of nice streets, of clean streets, reliable electricity are something that any other resident of Glendale gets. But you're just focusing on those folks that decided to place a stake in Glendale. Their hard-earned money, their, sweat and tears, and we're going to give you a gross sales tax or a square footage or whatever it is, and we want a little bit more from you. Whereas those who don't have businesses in Glendale but enjoy those same benefits of a well-run city do it without this fee on them. So that's why I'm looking at the equity in these things, and it's got to we're not making any decision today, I understand that, but in my mind, as I analyze it, that's got to make sense to me.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Any further comments or questions on the basic before I jump to some of the models? Okay, thank you. So just by brief way of intro, we did look primarily at Pasadena and Burbank. It's been our experience doing a number of these studies and with the direction of your capable staff. So it's very important to look at if such a tax were imposed, how would that place you relative to those in your neck of the woods, so to speak. And so we looked at Pasadena and Burbank and their structures here. These are just some basic facts about those two cities and their business license tax. Both of them use a base plus per employee. A little bit of variation on that. Pasadena's rates are a little bit higher, and you see about 5.9 million in annual revenue from that. Burbank's at 2.7 million. So
I have a question.
Good.
yes,
And this is to Councilmember Garpetian's comment, which I thought was question, which was really good. So 5.9 million for Pasadena. Do we know what it's costing them to administer this?
I don't know that directly. I can give you, it's going to sound self-serving. I can tell you roughly what our charges are because we administer for about 100 cities in the state.
You administer, including doing audits and all the rest of it?
We do.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So if you're interested in that, I can tell you, but I don't know what the city fully loaded costs are.
Well, maybe that's something we could learn later. We don't need to know
Sure.
it right now, but I think that was a really good point. How much of this gets eroded just through the cost of maintaining it?
Maybe you can provide a
Yeah,
ballpark.
say round figure, let's see, 20%. It's about a 20% overhead cost, I'd say.
20%, okay.
If you look at the per business averages, and then what the cost is to administer a single license broken out, I'd say just off the top of my head, 20%.
And Councilmember Brotman, this is nothing new to us either. We already engage in this level of service with some of our other taxes, whether it be the UUT or the TOT tax.
True, right.
Okay, thank you. So what we essentially did was take the structure from each city. So in this case, I'm showing you Pasadena's. So those are their categories. We talked briefly about the categories or classifications in different businesses. So in the left-hand column, we can see their categories that they have set up for different kinds of businesses. We broke down an estimate that we got from staff of the number of businesses here in the city. And then we applied the base rates and some estimated unit rates, as well as estimated number of employees, for example, to get to an estimated revenue that Glendale might see if it applied the Pasadena model sort of wholesale. That's what this shows. It's about 4.8 million. You can see that there are different rates. So for example, a general business tax, the base rate is $186 there. And for a professional business tax, the base rate is $496 in Pasadena, with unit rates also that vary greatly, recognizing the different business models and different kinds of contributions to the economy. Any questions about that model? Happy to take those. No? Okay. Then we did the same for Burbank. And again, you can see a different grouping of categories. There's nothing that says what the grouping has to be other than it has to be some rational grouping. Can't really single people out. So you see a different set of groupings here. There's some common themes. You'll usually see services, professional services, contractors, retailers, or general businesses. Those are the basic structures. Again, applying that to the same number of businesses from the data, using the estimates, the Burbank model would gross about 2.1 million per year in revenue to the city. Any questions about that model?
What's our number of businesses? Pasadena has 19,000. Are we a lot lower than that?
Well, we have, so you have good data on your businesses that are currently registering.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But you have incomplete data. So we estimate this is using the low data of what the known businesses. This could be only half. It would depend a lot on how much your economy is an importer. People bring in, come in, do construction, that sort of thing, outside in kind of businesses. Madam Mayor?
Wouldn't we be able to get the data from the state? Every business has to register with the state. Why can't we just get data from the Secretary of State that has just Glendale in it?
We could do that. We actually have some of that data for our discovery work that we do. We could take a look at that further if you'd like.
I think it would be nice for us to see how many active, how many maybe we've lost, what the trends are. That's easy and
I don't know
available
if we
to
would
us.
be able to give you trends, because at the Secretary of State data, you're just seeing the initial registration and whether someone maybe has closed. So we're
Well,
really
you'll-
just looking at a snapshot of what are the registered. And you're also not going to get, from Secretary of State data, you're not going to get any of the sole proprietors. You're really going to get LLC and corporations data. But I can take that back if that's the direction that I receive from staff to go look and see what that number is. We estimate that this is about half, that you're somewhere in the 18 to 20,000 total likely.
I would assume that the Secretary of State would share that data, and if not, then maybe we can put in a formal request, but.
I'm sure, Mayor Satriani, we can extract that information from the state, but I was going to ask Mr. Calvert, since his department handles the business registration certificates, and they have been able to improve on the numbers, the accuracy of the numbers that they get, but it's a work in progress. I don't know if you have an update, Mr. Calvert.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. We don't have an exact number quite yet. We do estimate that the number of businesses is probably somewhere between 10 and 13,000 within the city. We are just kicking into the program of getting essentially all the businesses registered under a BRC. In fact, we just had an event the other night to help kind of promote this. So we're going through an education program right now so that we can make sure we get all the businesses signed up so we do have that accurate information, accurate data, but that is a work in progress right now.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, any further questions on these items? So If not, thank you very much.
I do have a question for staff. The reports that we're getting today, were they based on votes that, or indication from council from last time we had this conversation and there was support for this? Why are these coming back and not others?
Good question, Mayor Sadurian. These are essentially the 4 potential tax measures that eventually down the road, if council's desire to move forward with it, it's going to require a additional work, whereas the other ones that council agreed on, we could do administratively, and we have already started on those. So these required more information and wanted to give an opportunity to council to ask their questions, whereas the other ones were fairly straightforward.
I mean, during the December meeting, we went through a bunch of recommendations that staff had.
Right.
And then each of the council members noted what they would be for, what they wouldn't be for.
Right.
I mean, I for one said I'm not okay with any of the tax. And I know that then Mayor Brotman was like taking notes, and I'm assuming that staff was also taking notes on how many of these recommendations had perhaps majority. So the ones you're presenting today are the ones that had majority?
Yes.
Not only that, they also are tax measures, right? Whereas the other ones, as I mentioned earlier, for example, there was consensus on consideration of developments and ground lease on city-owned property.
I'm only talking about tax.
Taxes, yes, these are the ones.
These were the ones
Right.
that had 3 or more?
There was also parking tax that council had considered and directed staff to look into, but that's going to require a lot more work because it's more complicated. But essentially, these 4 came on top.
Okay.
Oh, I do have a question for the gentleman here. 2 things. One, business license tax, does it have to go on the ballot for voter approval?
It sure does.
It does, 50% or 2/3?
At the moment, yes. Yeah, and it looks like, 50. Simple majority because it's a general tax.
General tax.
Has to go when a general election where there's at least 2 council seats up.
Okay. The other question is about, which cities have them, which cities don't have them. Can you give us a sense in LA County, 88 cities, you've told us now Burbank and Pasadena do, I know Los Angeles does. Can you give a sense of how widespread it is? How many cities are like Glendale that don't have a business license tax?
So it's a little bit more of a subtle answer than I'd like to give you. So bear with me if you don't mind, but there are about 600 municipalities in the state of California that could impose a business license tax. It's my understanding, last time I looked at the numbers, that about 90% have some form of business license. Some of those, and this is actually fairly common in the LA and Orange County, some of those are strictly regulatory. So I would have to say that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% that have some revenue-based measure, and some, it could be higher, could be closer to the 80s, but it's not uncommon at all. It's
Okay.
the majority that have some kind of business license tax.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, for the final part of the presentation, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Mark Lovelace, Senior Policy Advisor for HDL's cannabis team. Prior to joining HDL, Mark served for 8 years on the Board of Supervisors for Humboldt County, where he helped develop state and local cannabis policies.
Thank you for that. And good afternoon to all of you. Already got the introduction, so I don't need to do that part, but I do want to add one thing about HDL's cannabis program. When we work with counties or cities in helping them to consider, develop, implement, or regulate cannabis businesses, for one, we work only with the public sector. We do not work with the cannabis industry directly. Any parties in that, we work only for counties and cities in the sector. And the other point is that I want you to know that we remain agnostic about the cannabis industry and about cannabis in California. Our goal in doing this kind of work for you and other clients is simply to provide you with the best information we can to help you with your decision-making process. Where you land with that is entirely up to you. So with that, I want to get into my presentation here, and hopefully I can operate this thing great. So HDL was asked to provide a analysis and revenue projections for a potential cannabis retail tax as one of a number of possible revenue generating mechanisms for the city, and to provide and that the measure would provide additional revenue for the general fund. I want to note that the costs for regulating and permitting the cannabis retailers, were the city to go forward, would be paid by the businesses through fees. And that would leave all of the tax revenue available for discretionary spending as the city council sees fit. To develop our regulatory or our revenue estimates, we first look at the local setting. And the best way to do that is to map the locations of existing retailers within the surrounding area. This map shows those retailers, and as you can see, there are a lot of retailers located to the south of the city, in the city of Los Angeles, a few up to the north, but not a lot going on to the east and west. Cannabis businesses, cannabis retailers, tend to be a lot like other types of retailers in terms of their consumer purchase patterns, where people don't want to have to drive more than about 15 to 20 minutes to make routine purchases such as this. And so even though you can see that there's a lot of retailers in the area, people don't want to make a special trip outside of the city for that. So when we look at the service area, we look at the city and perhaps 15 to 20 minute radius outside of the city for that. As you can see, the cities of Burbank, Altadena, and Pasadena are all either unserved or underserved in the case of Pasadena, with 3 retailers. This suggests that retailers in the city of Glendale could potentially capture sales not only from the city's own population or consumers within the city, but also from residents in that surrounding area. This table shows the cannabis retail tax rates among a number of nearby cities. And as you can see, there's a wide range, generally from 4% up to 10%. The cities of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Baldwin Park, in addition, have separate rates for medicinal cannabis and for adult use cannabis. And that is something that a city can choose to do. The average rate for adult use among all of these jurisdictions is a little bit over 6%, and that is right around the high end of the range that HDL commonly recommends for the clients that we work with, though we note that that recommendation always, we work to figure out what is going on in your area. We think that it's important that the rates be consistent and fit well within the averages around you. To develop our revenue estimates, we consider, as noted, the population of the city and the surrounding service area. And without going through all of the math in this, that comes out to a little over 500,000 people. But much of that surrounding area is already served by retailers in adjacent cities. So even though there are no retailers in Burbank, for example, there are retailers on the other side of Burbank already making forays into that city. And likely conducting deliveries into the city of Glendale too. So because of that, we've included a leakage factor of 60%, which we've applied to the overall population of the service area. And that brings the total population that we're looking at in terms of the available population to be served by retailers in the city of Glendale to a little over 200,000, which is a little above the city's own population. So we imagine that retailers in the city of Glendale would be capturing some sales from outside of the city, but also resellers outside of the city would be capturing some sales from inside the city, and that would balance out to around 200,000 for your sales basis. To this, we apply a number of assumptions for the percentage of the population that uses cannabis, which is derived from public health data, the average purchase amount, average purchase frequency, and we account for some additional leakage to unlicensed or illicit delivery services, of which there are quite a few still out there, And so we've added an additional 30% leakage factor for that. This gives us a total estimated gross receipts of $33.5 million in sales for cannabis retailers located in the city of Glendale. To this, we've applied hypothetical cannabis tax rates of 4% and 6%, again, aligned with HDL's commonly recommended rates. And the 4% rate would generate about $1.3 million in annual cannabis tax revenue, and the 6% rate would generate around $2 million in annual cannabis tax revenue for the city. The city would also collect about $300,000 from the Bradley Burns Uniform Local Sales Tax on those sales, and around $250,000 from Measure S. Now, on those figures, I do want to note that in the last week, after I had prepared this analysis, I mean, just in the last few days, literally, I've seen some updated figures for some of the assumptions that were used, particularly the assumptions around the average transaction amount, which has come down according to these figures, and the average purchase frequency, which has also come down. I haven't yet had an opportunity to see the data underlying these reported figures, and I don't like to only read what's in the article. I like to read find the source data if I can. So I can't speak for sure about it. But if we applied those figures, this would reduce the estimated amounts of revenue to perhaps 1 million to 1.5 million. So I just wanted to make sure to share that with you. Let's see. And it does make sense, those figures, because some of the previous figures were from during COVID, where we know that there was a significant bump in sales. And we also know that the falling wholesale prices in the cannabis market, being from Humboldt County, we're very aware of the impact that's had on the cultivation sector, that those impacts are starting to be seen at the retail level with lower in consumer prices. So if the city were to place a cannabis tax measure on the ballot, and if it was approved by the voters, it's important to note that the city would be under no obligation to actually go forward with permitting or allowing cannabis businesses. And this is a strategy that's been done by a lot of jurisdictions that have wanted to get a measure in place, get it approved by the voters, as perhaps a bit of insurance to protect against the possibility of a citizen initiative being run in the future to allow, to force the city to allow cannabis businesses, or there is some concern out there about the state taking more aggressive measures to try to increase the reach of cannabis retailers as a way to fight the illicit industry. So there are jurisdictions that have done that, where they've placed a measure on the ballot, gotten it passed, and then said, we're going to go no further for the time being, but they have that on the books. In the event that the measure did pass and the city did choose to move forward with developing a regulatory program and permitting cannabis businesses, the city would have broad discretion to decide which types of cannabis businesses it wants to allow, how many, where they'd be located, under what conditions, hours of operation, additional security measures, a long list of things that the city would have jurisdiction over on that matter. And that's what I have for you. So I guess I'll ask if you have any questions.
Go ahead.
So in the jurisdictions where there are cannabis retail operations, have you studied to see what the increase costs to public safety resources have been as well?
There's a couple of things. First off, the evidence has been suggesting that the impact on crime related to cannabis retailers is primarily crime upon cannabis retailers, and that they can be targets for crime. And a lot of that has to do with the design standards, including whether or not they have glass windows that can be broken, whether they have interior security measures, whether they're relying only on the state's own standards, which are generally pretty good, or whether they're going above and beyond in terms of requiring additional security guards, perhaps 24/7 instead of only during hours of operation, whether they, require that all cannabis be removed from the retail area and locked into a safe at night. There are a number of things that can be done that we do also provide compliance inspections.
Well, my
for
question
businesses,
is
and we
more
found that
pertaining
that's-
to, and what I'm gathering from your answer is that a cannabis retail operation would potentially have more call for service or need of some public safety intervention than, say, a donut shop.
Perhaps in a donut shop, but the data that
Unless
we-
that donut shop was right next to the cannabis location.
Well, in which case you'll sell a lot of donuts. There is evidence that I've seen, I don't have anything I could cite for you today, that suggests that the level of crime upon cannabis retailers is not significantly different than upon banks, and that it's actually less than gas station mini markets.
Do we have the percentage of Glendale voters that voted in support of legalizing cannabis?
It was, I think, just north of percent. Just north
53.
of 50%.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Okay. How's Pasadena doing?
That was my question.
I mean, Pasadena passed, approved the cannabis retail and everything else. How are they doing in general?
I did not, as a part of this, was not asked to look at the revenues that they've generated from that. I know that it did take them a while to get their retailers up and running and get their doors open. And we did work with them initially, and I wouldn't be able to, I could answer that question for you if you'd like, but I'd have to do a little bit of research.
I would appreciate it. You don't have to do it today, but
Okay.
we can maybe contact.
Yeah, we have a follow-up session, Councilman Garpet, and we
So-
can provide the answer.
How much is the state tax on cannabis? 35%?
The state tax is 15%, the state excise tax on cannabis. Initially, there was also a cultivation tax, and that tax got rescinded. And the tax, it used to be that the tax was imposed differently, and now it's been moved up to where it's all taxed at the end, at the retail. But collectively, the 30 to 35% figure, we have seen that previously when you, working with jurisdictions that allow a variety of cannabis business types, and there's a tax on each of the different business types, that the combined tax, when you incorporate the state tax and all of the separate local taxes, tends to be around 30%.
Right. And for Glendale to achieve that $1 million or $1.5 million revenues, how many locations do we have to approve? Because $40 million in sales, that's a lot of sales. There were cannabis shops on Melrose, I believe. When it started, it was very hot. They did 60, 70 million, and they can hardly pay their rent today. So this industry has gone down, and in the beginning, they said, tax the heck out of it, approve it, allow it, right, legalize it. After that, when you go 30%, 32% on state side, you have to pay taxes, plus 4 to 6% to a city. This really squeezes your business, right? I mean, what business pays 40% or 37% in taxes? Then they came back and said, well, it's too much tax, you have to reduce the tax. So it's an up and down situation, and in Pasadena, I know because I'm not 100% sure, but that's what I believe. I did some research on it, that because they're districts and no one wanted cannabis retailer in their neighborhood, so they squeeze it all in one area that all these districts connect, the boundary lines in one area, and there are like 4 or 5 of them in the same vicinity, and really round down that neighborhood. So I think we need to be a little careful as to how are we going to, I don't know why this I haven't, and I followed council meetings, I never heard about cannabis tax being part of the conversation, and I'm kind of surprised to see this. I think we have to be very careful because Pasadena did everything. They did the property tax, business tax, cannabis tax, and all of it. They also did a similar measure like Measure S that we have, and they're still in the hole. So just taxing in general and trying to push everything at the same time. I know the forecast is not very rosy, but based on what I see, we can use some of our reserves, and we can also be a little bit more responsible with the way we spend our budget, and not to have to go through this, because I'm totally surprised to see this in here. So, and I don't know how would that work. How do you charge a tax that the item is not sold in your city? How would you charge $1.5 million?
That would be if the city went ahead and developed and allowed for cannabis businesses. If the city had a cannabis tax.
Then this is kind of,
Councilmember Harpetian, if I may, I think part of the presentation was if we wanted to take a look at this and put it on the ballot, to be able to safeguard ourselves just in case the state comes out with something that overrides our local rules, for us to be able to have that in place at a time, if that time should come.
yeah, I mean, we always have that idea out there that maybe we get sued for districting, or we may get sued by the state or what have you, and then we're doing this because we may or may not. But in slide 42, it indicates city is under no obligation to allow cannabis businesses. If you're under no obligation to allow businesses, how do we charge the tax?
That's Councilmember Arpagan. If the measure passes, just in case the measure passes, then you can, the measure passes, but you are under no obligation to move forward with allowing retailers. But at least you have that measure in place, and city has the control of time, manner, and place.
I think that's, okay.
Yeah, my question's been answered.
I don't know much about Pasadena, but it looks like they have 3 retailers. Do they have a pilot program running? Or is it, they cap it at 3?
They called it a pilot program, and as best as I'm aware, they haven't removed that terminology from it. That's a common way that a number of jurisdictions have approached it, as a very limited approach, and to see if they're comfortable with it, and it may maintain that moniker into the future. I do want to just, there was a comment about how many retailers and the city of Pasadena, and you were saying the amount of revenue, and then it's fallen down per retailer. One thing that we've seen across the state, this is all still brand new. No licensed cannabis businesses existed before January of 2018. And when they started coming online, there were very few jurisdictions that would allow these businesses. And the few that did, the retailers that would go in there would suck up sales for a wide area around, because whereas now it's becoming a little more normal, and the consumer purchasing habits, as I said, are 15, 20 minutes. When it was still novel, they could suck up all the sales for a wide area around them. And so we saw a lot of the early adopters, the jurisdictions that allowed for cannabis retailers when it was not the norm, those retailers and their jurisdictions were collecting a lot of sales and a lot of revenue. And now, as other cities come in and populate around them with retailers, they're losing that surplus and going back to serving only their own population base.
Yeah.
So the figures, if you recall, the figures that Purdue showed currently a surplus, just a slight surplus above the city's own population, which would mean that if the other cities around Burbank, Altadena, whatever, came on with allowing cannabis retailers, you might see a little bit of bump in the near term before that happens. And if they do, you wouldn't see too much of a decline, because you'd still be serving your own population, which is not a lot less.
Yeah, I know In Tahanga and Foothill Boulevard, within 3 blocks, I think there's 4 of them, right, next to each other or across the street from each other. And also for the next session, Mr. City Manager, if we can have a breakdown of the way the state programmed those taxes and how do they spend it on. If I remember correctly, there was a presentation done in SCAG that 40 to 45% goes to law enforcement, to enforcing the law, so there won't be any, issues with selling cannabis. There was 20 or 25% that was, or 30%, to educate young children not to do drugs. And it's kind of counter, but if you have that breakdown, I would appreciate it for next go around.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, we have speaker cards. How many?
Yes, we have 8 speaker cards and no calls at the moment.
Okay, so the last card we'll take is right at the end of the first speaker, just as our new protocols.
I'll begin with the first public comment is by Harry Atiri. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to be heard. I'm opposing to any tax increases for a number of reasons. It causes already a shortage that is already very bad in our area, and it's causing a very severe punishment on the sale of the homes or the properties that are held by the older generation, that they need that income for their retirement and their future expenses. Also, it punishes the new families that are coming to our area and they're not able to afford any homes. That in fact, in one example, where I live, there is not a single family with a child from 1500 block to end of 1600 block. So that is my reason for objections. Any questions for me? Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Our next public comment is by Armin Avedian. And following Armin is David Kashichian.
Good afternoon, Honorable City Council and Mayor. My name is Armin Avedian, 40-year resident of Glendale, and I am a realtor. If one has a medical problem, normally they would consult with a medical expert, like a doctor. If one considered investing their savings, their lifetime savings, normally they would consult with a financial advisor. Then why is it that when a city council possibly is considering their future budget and some kind of real estate related tax may be discussed and considered, the local expert, i.e. the realtors, are not contacted and consulted? Here's one that you haven't heard before. I would like to draw an analogy between a lioness and the Glendale Association of Realtors. A lioness will do whatever in her power to protect her cubs. As she feels danger, she will try to eliminate it. Realtors, in turn, are not just greedy business people out to fill their pockets, as the Department of Justice tries to accuse us of day in and day out. When we read on our City Council's agenda, and it says, and I quote, potential future revenue enhancements, our ears perk up and we mobilize to protect our clients who are the homeowners and the tenants of the City of Glendale. If revenue enhancement in any way considers a parcel tax, a transfer tax, or a mansion tax, then that will harm everyone. It will make Glendale less attractive to buyers, will make selling less attractive to property owners, and it will harm tenants due to higher rents needed to cover the newly enacted expenses on landlords. Realtors, whom are mostly homeowners and renters in Glendale, engage in advocacy, as I'm sure you, the City Council, have experienced through a barrage of thousands of emails which were sent to you by concerned residents in recent days. We feel when there's smoke, there may be fire in the future. If a city mayor states in a city council meeting on December of 2023 that he kind of likes the idea of mansion tax, that is sufficient smoke for us to call foul. We, the people, elected you as our honorable representatives to find alternate solutions. In closing, please do not even discuss a parcel tax, a mansion tax, or a transfer tax. The residents of the Jewel City deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is by David Kashtian. And following David is Odette Peters.
Good afternoon, Council. David Gaishan here with the Apartment Associations of Greater Los Angeles. A transfer tax will send Glendale on a path that will stifle development, discourage new businesses, and jeopardize the city's existing resources. This transfer tax would pose a significant risk to Glendale's budget stability and those existing city services that rely on it. We've witnessed in neighboring cities like Los Angeles how such taxes can dramatically underperform, leaving huge budgetary gaps and city councils scrambling for last-minute fixes. In Los Angeles, the actual revenue collected was a mere fraction of initial projections, with only 24% of the original estimate being collected. In addition, implementing a transfer tax would drive developers away from Glendale, making it far more difficult for the city to meet its state housing element requirements and losing many well-paying construction jobs as well. Further, a transfer tax will deter new businesses from establishing roots in Glendale due to a lack of available housing for their workers. In turn, this would lead to a loss in potential new demand for existing businesses such as restaurants, entertainment, and personal services, and lost new sales tax revenue for the city. A transfer tax will also make it far more difficult for property owners to sell their multifamily units when needed for financial or other personal needs. Renters will also face living conditions that remain outdated and without modern living conveniences, as owners will grapple with this huge new tax burden that substantially erodes the incentive to upgrade older properties prior to sale. To support a robust and expanded economy in Glendale, the City Council should focus on policies that attract new businesses and encourages development. A transfer tax would have the exact opposite impact and should not be pursued. We urge the City Council to instead spend its time discussing policies that will promote long-term prosperity for the entire Glendale community. Thank you.
Thank you. Odette Peters, and following Odette is Arthur Mangasarian.
Odette Peters, Realtor in town. I'm here to ask you to please consider voting no on transfer tax. My reasonings are as follows. An owner buys a home for $1 million, spends $500,000 to renovate it, and sells it for $2 million. On current taxes on 0.0125, his taxes would be $25,000. Whereas if you decide to pass this transfer tax, it's going to be $100,000. That's damaging, and it's steep. Please consider voting no on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Arthur Mangasarian. Next is Matthew Buck. Following Matthew is Greg Ostorian.
Hi, thank you, Council. Matt Buck, California Apartment Association. You guys got my letter. I won't belabor the point. The transfer tax is going to make things much more expensive to live in Glendale. Things are going to be more unaffordable. You guys are working so hard to bring more affordability into Glendale. I think this would work very much against it. You're going to hear a lot of talk and a lot of stories come forward. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Greg Ostorian, and our following Greg is Lisa Morris, our final public comment.
Madam Mayor and City Council, my name is Greg Astorian. I'm here representing Glendale Association of Realtors and staff, of course. in opposition to transfer tax. I'm only authorized to talk about the transfer tax. That's our immediate concern. And let me provide you with some perspective. In 1967, the federal government scuttled and took out from the code, from Internal Revenue Service Code, what they had as a transfer tax. That's about 70 or 80 years ago. Fast forward 80 years, City of Los Angeles, we are considering one, and the City of Los Angeles levied a transfer tax, and the immediate aftermath was, by some accounts, anywhere between 70 to 80% reduction in the number of the transactions. If I were to apply that 70 or 80% or 60%, or conservatively even 50%, to the numbers that your staff have shown you at 970 transactions in 2023, you will decimate the business of real estate in this city. We will urge you not to do so. Let me provide you with some statement of facts and some data points. And these are facts. Shane Phillips from UCLA Lewis Center was an early proponent and adopter of the transfer tax. He was just quoted in Los Angeles Times stating, and he's reanalyzing that entire transfer tax debacle in LA, that there has been a pretty significant decrease in developing ripe parcels, the move from Los Angeles to the surrounding cities that do not levy that tax. So that's something for you to consider. Statement of fact. Prior to adoption of the transfer tax in City of Los Angeles, they were collecting about $212 million in a city of 4 million, $212 million in transfer tax. After that, that amount has increased nearly to 230, 240 million, a drop in the bucket for Los Angeles, as opposed to the $900 million that was projected. So what did it do? It affected deleteriously impacted deleteriously the business of real estate in Los Angeles. And that's true. Don't make homes any more expensive than they are in the city of Glendale. Nationally, one needs 4 times his or her median income. May I take another 20 seconds?
I'm going to be equal to everyone to say that.
Not a problem. So we oppose the transfer tax. Thank you.
Our final public comment is by Lisa Morris.
Good evening, council members. Some of you know me by name. The proposal of a transfer tax, in my opinion, should be dead on arrival. We already pay too much taxes, especially in California, and this is an exorbitant amount. Had you proposed a minor increase, that might have been acceptable, but what's being proposed, as I hear, is exorbitant. And I just wonder why, if there's a deficit in the budget, why that's going to be borne on these people who own homes. I just don't think that's fair. And I support all the comments made prior to me, so I'm with them all the way. I do think you should be looking at our alternatives. And why would a person want to come into Glendale and start a business or buy a commercial property or a home, knowing when they're going to sell it, it's going to be taxed so much on the transfer? It's just too much. And personally, if there's any council member who's going to vote for it, that council member probably will not get my vote next election. And there's probably a lot of other residents who feel the same way. And I know it has to be fixed. I just think there's other alternatives you need to consider more seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Does staff have additional comments that you'd like to make?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Any of my colleagues? Okay. I kind of held off some of my comments to the end. I did want to, I know there was a comment made about voting for taxes. Just to be clear, taxes have to be placed on a ballot in order for the voters to decide or not. But, you know, I recognize that you're not taking feedback today, but I just want to be on the record again saying that my position on taxes remains unchanged from the December meeting. I'm not for the transfer tax, the parcel tax, the small business tax, and whatever other taxes you had brought forth previously. I recognize we're going through an exercise here for us to learn more about that. I'm interested in us spending time and hearing from staff about more creative ways we can generate revenue, whether it's, you know, where we're at with leasing some of our properties that are going to bring funding in, where our IT is with internet, where we are with possibly creating some partnerships for EV chargers that are needed also for our auto sales. And so whatever else staff can come up with, I think these are the kind of discussions we should be having. I think especially when it comes to the transfer tax and the parcel tax, I said this during the December meeting, not all homeowners are created equal. When you look at immigrant families, working class families, they don't actually own that property. It's probably a big chunk of that is a loan that may be 4 or 5 family members put together to purchase that. And you're, you know, when you're adding taxes to that at a point of sale, particularly, you're also taking away their opportunity to make an investment, and maybe they were going to renovate or be able to purchase a larger home, maybe because their family's growing. So that's all I have for now. I would like to really see, one of our sessions to include a conversation about the other revenue streams that staff is working on. I think that would be helpful to us.
Just one thing to kind of follow up on the thing you said at the beginning. We're not voting on anything, but also to the last speaker who said the proposal is exorbitant. There is no proposal. Just want to make sure everybody understands. There is no proposal. So all we've seen are analyses of what different cities have done. So just want to make that clear.
I don't know if this is a pie in the sky maybe proposal. We know that our share of property taxes are 13% versus Pasadena, which is almost 19, and 23, and Burbank is 19. I know this was locked in place when in the late 60s or early 70s that Prop 13 was being approved, and many people voted for the city to receive less percentage on property taxes in order to lock their property values in. And I think we need, maybe the real estate industry can help us in this, to see what percentage of these properties are already sold. Because when you sell your property, it gets reassessed and your property taxes go up anyways. And I think they're, compared to all the stock of properties that we have in Glendale, many of them are sold. So why don't we look into if there is a way to receive a little bit more in property taxes, our share of taxes? Because if we're getting 13% and it's $84 million in our budget, if we get 20%, that budget would go up to $129 million. So we will get $45 million more every year, just not increasing any taxes, but receiving more from the taxes that we're already paying. So I don't know how would that work, but I think it's worth looking into it. That's something that no one is paying more, but we're receiving our share of property taxes, like our neighboring cities do. So maybe we can get some help from also on the data as to how many homes or properties were sold since 1970s, and they're reassessed already. So that's about it. Thank you, Madam.
Councilman Sakian.
Thank you. I know that there's been a lot of excitement. I received the emails, and I've heard the folks who've come here and spoken, And the thing I'm most grateful for is the fact that this is probably the largest public audience we've had outside of televised realm for a budget study session. So they're seeing all of the numbers that we're seeing. They're looking at the situations that we're seeing. There's no one up here that's necessarily profiting or grifting or getting anything out of the decisions we're making. We're all here to try and make sure that we put Glendale on a financially responsible path that is able to pay for the services that we're able to provide, that maintains the quality of life, that brings people to Glendale. And I know that there's a lot of realtors in the audience and realtors being represented. You know how important it is to maintain a certain quality of life, because your ability to make Glendale an attractive place to purchase a home relies on that. So we're all in this together. We have heard some interesting presentations and options. Some of it I don't agree with it. Some of it I'd like to learn more about. But I just want to say that I'm grateful for the fact that people are actually paying attention to this budget process. Because outside of that, when we make decisions and I'm in the public sphere and people say, well, why don't we do this or why can't we get that? It's nice to have nice things, folks, but we have to also be able to pay for them. Thanks.
Briefly, so I agree with Councilmember Garbetian. It truly is unfair, the property tax disparity. But it's nothing new. Back in the Jim Starbird days, we looked at joining a group of cities it's called equalization, property tax equalization, to try and bring those Pasadenas down and the Glendales up to have some set and equal fee across all the cities. But you can imagine that those cities who have those high rates of return are fighting like hell. They're going to not give up their budget easily. And the problem is, the reason we're so low, not to get too far into it, Glendale was a low tax city. Before Prop 13, we used to impose our own property taxes. The reason our taxes were so low, besides being a well-run city, is we were subsidizing our budget by the Grayson Power Plant. That's why our forefathers agreed, and not our forefathers, but our residents twice agreed that up to a 25% transfer from the Grayson proceeds could come in and backfill our city budget. That's why we kept our property taxes low. Lo and behold, Prop 13 came in and said, it's like musical chairs, everybody freeze, and we were stuck with a low amount, and we were penalized because we were a well-run city, supplementing our city revenues with our own power plant. Pasadena was not one of those cities, and they are basically taking advantage of it at this point. Which begs the question, is there any way in a future budget study session to go back and examine the transfer from Grayson to our budget? And the only reason I raise that, there's a lot of equity in that. I was talking about inequities. Everybody pays an electric bill, not just the business owner or not just the guy that owns property. Everybody pays an electric bill. And let's look into that if we can and see what the feasibility is. I know we did a cost of service study just recently, but that's something I think we should dust off and see where that puts us. Thank you.
Mayor Sartre. Sure. Yeah, I just hearing what Councilmember Najarian said, I would like to say I agree with that. And I think that, so I would support looking at that. But of course, we've just gone through the cost of service analysis. We've just done a significant rate increase. So we obviously don't want to do something that's going to be so large, so sudden, that is going to make us go back to the drawing board on that. But I do think it would make sense for us to look at that, pulling some more revenue out of the Glendale Water and Power. And perhaps we can, make part of that an effort to increase some of our support programs for our low-income utility payers, because they are already suffering. So taking a little bit more out of it and then using at least a portion of that to buffer some of these high utility costs for our lower income residents, I think would be a smart way to go. So I would agree with that.
Mayor Sartri and Member City Council, we've taken notes and we will follow up on these items and bring them back at the study session number 4.
Can you please add to your notes to also send us an email with how many, the tax measures that were proposed? Can we get an email of which council members asked for a report back on each of those items that you recommended? I'd like to see, without having to go and watch the meeting myself, what those.
We certainly can and we will. From my recollection, and we're going to go back and watch it, from my recollection, I believe we started off tallying which, from each council member, which they preferred to come back, which items they preferred to have come back. There was a lot of overlap, and I think the direction that we received in general was just to go and investigate all of them because there seemed to be enough desire to talk about these and bring them forward as they became available.
And in response,
Recollection of that meeting, I remember us literally just tallying up who wanted which one to be brought forth. So I walked away from that meeting with the understanding that the only ones that were going to be brought forth as part of discussion were the ones that there was interest from colleagues to actually hear about them.
we will go back and follow up on that. But I just wanted to make a clarification in response to Councilmember Garpetian's comments, which is accurate. Potential cannabis tax was not discussed at the dais, but the direction was if there's any other taxes that we can think of. And cannabis tax came to mind because Pasadena had it passed more recently. And I had checked with the then mayor and was agreed that we can bring this back for discussion only.
Mayor?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and I don't fault staff for this exercise. There were presentations made, revenue, generating processes and call them taxes, all suggested. Again, some of it I'm going to agree with it, and most of it I may not. But I think it's important for us to have these conversations. Whether I brought up cannabis, which I didn't, or someone else did, or staff brought it forward. I think it's an important discussion to have. We are living in the era of cannabis legalization, and other cities and neighboring cities have done it. It would only make sense for us to at least at one point have that discussion here. So I don't fault staff for bringing it, and I appreciate that you guys took the initiative on your own to look for things. Hopefully you can look for other things that aren't, I don't know, maybe a donut tax or whatever, but we'll figure it out. We'll get there. Thank you.
I do agree with you on, cannabis was not part of that list we discussed last time, so I think especially given what was said about potential something coming down from the state. Anything else?
Yeah, I think one other thing we need to look into is if there is 2 or 3 or 4 of us or what have you, we don't agree to increasing taxes, why are we even trying to put it on the ballot? If this council doesn't have any desire to increase any taxes, why is it part of our discussion? I understand we can always discuss issues, but why is it part of our discussion if we don't agree to it? It's like an ordinance. If I don't agree to, I don't know, upzoning an area or downzoning an area, why would I even discuss it? I think the staff should know if we are for it or not. So at the end of the day, we go through all these exercises and knowing that we're not going to vote for it to be placed on the ballot. So I think that's another thing for next study session to understand if we want to even put all these issues on the ballot or not. Or, even cannabis, we've done all the studies. At that time, it was $700,000 a year for the city, and it cost a lot to regulate it, to police it, and secure it. And it's not I wouldn't want to have $1 of cannabis tax in the city in general. So my position has always been very clear about it. And again, if it's coming back, I'm telling everyone right now that I would vote no on the cannabis. It's not just passing it. You need to have 4 votes to change your zoning to allow cannabis in the city. So anyways, I think there are other ways of increasing our revenues, and we need to look into it. And I think next few study sessions will be more clear as to where we stand.
Sorry, I have one more, because we're having this general discussion, and I just want to say, I think we need to have everything on the table, because we just saw the 5-year forecast. We just saw that the next 3 years are going to be okay, but in the 4th year, we fall below that 25% threshold, which is the bottom end of our reserve level. And we know that pension obligations are increasing. We know that they are going to continue to increase into the mid-2030s. And we have to be honest, right? We have to be honest with ourselves and the public. In 3 years, we're going to have a problem. So we're either going to be looking at new revenues, and maybe we can find new revenues that aren't going to be painful, like, you know, our parking lots and some of the other things that we've talked about. But in 3 years' time, we're going to have to, and I think we shouldn't wait for 3 years. I think we need to start making these decisions now, but we have to be honest. What new sources of revenue are we going to find? If we're going to take everything off the table, then let's talk explicitly about what services we're going to cut. Are we going to cut police? Are we going to cut fire? Are we going to cut parks? Less people to do permit processing, less code enforcement. We have to be honest with the public. Something's got to give. So when people come and say, don't do this, don't do that, I hope they'll tell us what they think we should and can do, because something has to be done. That's all I'll say.
Well, we can go back and forth on these issues for a long time, but I think we did that several years ago with Measure S. We said we are going to have $30 million every year put in a place that city can make a decision on how are we going to spend that fund. That fund is in our general fund already. And another $3-4 million or $5 million. Look at Pasadena. Pasadena has done all of it already. The property tax, parcel tax, cannabis tax, business tax, and Measure S type measure. And they are still in the hole because maybe they're not managing it right. I don't know. But I agree. We have to understand how are we going to balance our budget. But I don't think just increasing fees or more taxes is the answer. 5 years later, you're going to talk about the same thing. So we have to have a better understanding as to how can we manage our budget better. Thank you.
Good? All right.
Great.
Awesome. Next item.
Our next item is community development regarding use of city days at the Alex Theater, Armenian Fairy Tales 30th Anniversary Show. A motion to approve use of one of 12 annual city days at the Alex Theater for Armenian Fairy Tales 30th Anniversary Show on May 18th, 2024.
You have to turn it to
Go ahead. I was waiting for them to leave, sorry. Why don't you go ahead?
This will be quick. Mayor Satrian, members, City Council, staff has been in front of you before to allocate one or so far, I believe, 3 days out of the 12 days, city days at the Alex Theater for performances. With that, I'm going to invite Tom Arsad, our Deputy Director of Community Development, for a short presentation on this item.
Very short. Good afternoon, Mayor Satrian, members of council. With our agreement with the operator of the Alex Theater, we do get 12 days to use for city events, but we also have the opportunity to sponsor community events. This request is the third request for the year. Like I said, we have 12. So the first was Armenian Genocide event. The second was the Jacob Armen event, and this is for Armenian Fairy Tales. And she wrote down phonetically how to say this in Armenian. Hakyani Kanchum. So it's a nonprofit organization. They serve after school. They have an after school program, and they've actually been hosting events at the Alex Theater for 30 years. So this is their 30th anniversary. Pre-pandemic, their shows were sold out at the theater. Post-pandemic, the audience have reduced to about 900 to 1,000 attendees. They are currently on sale and have sold 700 tickets, so the theater's capacity is 1,400. So the event is still a few weeks away. We are hopeful that they would sell out, as this is a big event for them. And that concludes the presentation. The event is on sale on Ticketmicket. Staff and the theater are supportive of this. So if the council approves it, that we would be sponsors, and they will promote the city of Glendale as a sponsor for the event.
Any questions? Do we have a motion?
I have a quick comment. I received a couple of phone calls about how does the city choose the people who use the services, and I asked a question in a briefing. Can you please elaborate on or let public know as to what are the criterias for any other organization for next year or following years? How do we choose an organization to give one day to them to use the Alex Theater?
Absolutely, thank you. We do have, it is a flyer. We do have it on the city website, the community development website page under administration. The Alex Theater website also has this information. But the qualifications to make the request is that it's a non-weekend date only. Friday, Saturday, Sunday are excluded from requests. As you will note, this is a weekend event, which the Alex Theater staff gave us their approval for because of the long-standing relationship they've had with this organization. We request that we receive the request no more than 90 days, we must receive it 90 days in advance of the event. They cannot already have an agreement signed with the theater. They must be a previous user of the theater, as our interest in having these dates available was to support community groups that have demonstrated their ability to draw a crowd, and that they are someone that the community is interested in, or a reasonable expectation of 700 attendees, and that no organization can make more than one request a year. So all requests are sent to me, and I am the liaison to the theater. My email address is tsadd@glendaleca.gov. My name is Tamar Sad, but otherwise this information is available on the community development website.
Thank you.
I think the program is great. I love the idea of doing family-oriented programming, especially involving stories that have a lesson and that involve children and puppets and whatever else. But one of the things I would like to say is that in addition to supporting a nonprofit, it would be great if we could also get them to probably ask them if they would be willing to also donate some of their time to perform in some of our parks where we have summer camps and other programs, so we can have these relationships besides just sponsoring them, to have them also give to some of our city programs as well. I think that would be great. Other than that, I'm fine with it.
Okay. I grew up on Hecatep Ganchum, so this is near and dear to my heart, and I'm in full support. If we have a motion, no more questions.
No questions. I can move the item.
Okay.
Second.
Roll call.
Thank you.
Council members Brotman,
Yes.
Ladbetian,
Yes.
Kasakian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Mayor Asatryan.
Yes. Next is adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Right. And then we have our Oh, we are. All right. Welcome to the April 30th regular meeting of the Glendale City Council. Call to order at 4:25 p.m. May we have a roll call?
Yes, council members Brotman,
Here.
Ladbetian,
Here.
Kasakian,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Mayor Asatryan.
Here. What do we have in closed session, and do we anticipate reporting out?
Yes, for the closed session, we have item A, conference with legal counsel pending litigation, JW1 et al. Versus City of Glendale et al. USDC case number 2 2023-CV-03006-JAK-AGR. And B, item B is Public Employee Performance Evaluation City Attorney.
All right, do we anticipate reporting him?
We do not.
I think you have to say we recess.
We're recessing to closed session.